not only been the police officers, it's been judges, it's been lawyers, defense lawyers, it's been juries in some cases that have made mistakes and done things wrong. So the whole system is flawed, as far as I'm concerned.
And I started talking real loud, and some people in the motel started opening their doors. And I asked these people to please trail these people. They say they're police officers. No one is in a uniform. They're all white, okay? Some people trailed us to the police station. And I believe that's how I got there safely. Other than that, I don't think I never would have made it there.
The state's attorney, DeVille, walked up in there, and this was his exact words, verbatim. Mr. Smith, we know you're innocent, but you know how the game go. Those were his exact words. The trial judge, she's supposed to be known as a known alcoholic. She sentenced me on my birthday to be executed, on my birthday. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought for a moment I'd be convicted. Like I said, there was no evidence. They had no case, except 3 senior officers made up a confession.
Then the police just started coming there. There was a typewriter bag sitting right there behind, you know, like a typewriter and stuff like that. Then all of a sudden, you understand, one of them just put the typewriter bag on my head and started smuggling. I'm handcuffed to the wall, and I'm going blacking out like this. Here they trying to make me sign some kind of paper or something. I said, man, I ain't did sign no kind of paper. Then he took the thing, and they kept hitting me and knocking me out. Boom.
Here in Illinois, we discovered through an investigative series published in January 1999 by the Chicago Tribune that as recent as the 1980s, prosecutors in Cook County actually had a contest called the 2-ton contest. And this information came from a former supervisor in the Cook County prosecutor's office. This 2-ton contest was a contest among prosecutors to see who could convict defendants who weighed a total of over 4,000 pounds first, and that would be the winner. And because most defendants in the criminal courts in Cook County are black, this contest was called Niggers by the Pound.
They called me all type of names. You black nigger, you did this and you did that. I don't know what they're talking about. So when I began to open my mouth, they told me to shut up. And one guy, I read lips. He said, we're gonna kill this SOB.
This captain, I'm not gonna mention his name, told me to my face, he said, everybody knows that Travis Mary's the one that set you up. But again, I felt the prosecutor knew the same thing, you know.
They had me handcuffed to a hot radiator. One hand and the other one was on me. It was burning me, and I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of hollering or winching. I was quite angry then because nobody would tell me why I'm handcuffed, what I'm being charged with. They said, well, these papers are typed up, all you have to do is sign, and we'll have who we want. They transferred me to Judge Maloney on 26th in California, who is doing time in penitentiary for taking bribes and sending innocent men to death row. Another one of his compadres told on him, said that you couldn't win in front of him if you didn't have any money. A state's attorney came forward because he knew who the killers were. And he testified as to that it was the state witnesses who were the killers, who were involved. They didn't take their fingerprints. They didn't try them. They was embarrassed.
I just kept that faith, you know. I never knew when or how I would get out. The 19th of February of 1999, I'm back on death row. And my attorney called down to the institution. I don't know much about law, but I do know about that reversal, the straight out reversal, right? And I know that's something that, you know, it's like trying to win the lottery, one of the million, you know? So but he's not saying anything other than we will try to have you out by this evening. I said, oh, wait a minute, in order for you to do that, they would have to be and gave me what they call straight out reversal. And he said, Mr. Smith, that's what they gave you, a straight out reversal. And you have to excuse me, but every time I get to that point, I just cannot hold back. And I say, you know, don't play with me. You know, he said, I'm not playing with you. That's what they gave you, a straight out reversal. And he said, so we go try to get a judge to get your bond, you know.
When you know here's a man who says he's a judge, and you got state attorney lying, you got policemen hiding evidence, how can you feel? If you feel angry, you can't do anything about it. They got you locked up.
And my next door neighbor, he said, you know what, man? He said, they ain't letting you out of here till after the election. This guy Jackson next door to me. And lo and behold, the election, the mayoral election was the 23rd of that month. And that next morning, the 24th, about 7 o'clock that morning, they ringing on my bar, Mr. Smith, pack up, you out of here. I was already packed. They said, you out of here. They gave me, I believe it was $79 and a paid ticket to Chicago. What happened was they was trying to get me transported by flight, but my attorney said that the state wouldn't pay the extra $12 to have me flown into Chicago.
Now, the compensation that one gets from the state is hardly enough, and it really doesn't even take the right form. These folks don't necessarily need money years and years later as much as they need help the minute they're released. They need counseling, they need job training, they need education, they need housing, they need health insurance. All of these kinds of things which they may well have had or would have had in their lives had they not been ripped from their families and their loved ones and put into prison.
I cared about people. Those people changed me completely. I had no feelings. I didn't like, I didn't love, I didn't hate. Nothing was there. I was just an empty hull. 3 guys wrote me a note. They was going to take their life. As a matter of fact, all 3 of those men have been executed now. It frightened them. And I told them, I said, please, don't do that job for them. Don't do that. Don't kill yourself. Let them do that, you know, because God will punish them.
While I was testifying, the judge, in our courtroom, we have the jury would sit off to my left. I would be 1 level up in the witness stand, and behind me in a higher level up would be where the judge sat. While I was testifying, he was rolling his eyes, throwing his arms up in the air like, oh, brother, can you believe this guy? Finally, when somebody in the gallery that was watching protested to my attorneys didn't even protest. They approached the bench, asked the judge to stop, so he just spun his chair around and faced the wall for the rest of my testimony.
Basically what they said, they convicted him because of this alleged confession, and because then when they arrested him, he wasn't acting like he was grieving enough.
And they also got 3 prisoners come forward with 3 separate stories saying that I had in fact confessed to them while I was held in the cell too. They used what I assume was the most believable of the 3. He claimed I confessed to him twice while I was in jail with him, and he received early release for his testimony.
Most people think, gee, I'd never confess to a crime that I didn't commit, and so they think that if you've got a confession, that's it. The confession is the gold standard of evidence in the criminal justice system. Nonsense. It's not. And often, the psychological techniques that are employed by police are so powerful that you don't really have to torture people.
These 3 officers all got promotions for what they did. 2 of them are still on the force. This was the nature of justice in McHenry County at the time of my arrest.
If they had just done their job properly in the first place, how they can convict somebody with no motive, no evidence.
In the case of Gary Gauger, they don't want to have egg on their face. They don't, and it isn't simply that we made an honest mistake. I think part of the problem is that the police and the state's attorneys use very, very inappropriate methods when they're doing their prosecution. They withhold evidence, they force confessions, and when you make a mistake and a mistake comes out, I think those things then are going to be investigated or looked at. And the press will start saying, well, how did this happen? How could you have made a mistake and prosecuted or convicted Gary Gauger? What went wrong here? And if they start doing an anatomy of the case, they'll come out with all kinds of improper procedures on the part of the state's attorneys and the police.
We were really lucky in that we got in contact with Professor Larry Marshall, Professor of Ethics at Northwestern University. The day he agreed to take my case, he spoke to the judge first, and the judge says, look, if I give this guy life without parole, will you drop the case? At the time, Larry did not have the manpower to take anything except capital cases, but in this case, I mean, it smelled so bad, he agreed to take my case anyways. Larry Marshall and 60 of his students spent some 2,000 hours preparing my appeal. We won our appeal in the 2nd District in February of 1996. The appellate court ruled I was illegally arrested, so they threw out what was the police called a confession. Now the prosecution knew as early as September of 1995. In September of 1995, the federal government's division, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, had approached them and told them they had evidence that the outlaws, in fact, had murdered my parents, not me.
once you've been convicted in the trial court, you're no longer innocent in the eyes of the law. You can't simply raise reasonable doubt at that point. Innocence is not relevant. The only thing that is relevant once you've been convicted is whether or not you received a fair trial.
Why is it that the state's attorneys are so reluctant to say, you know, we made a mistake and we're sure glad we caught it in time? And they never do it. Never. And I think that it has to do, number one, with a certain mentality. We're out to win cases, not to do justice. And in fact, the Supreme Court came out with some kind of what they call a rule, which is simply a statement saying that the state's attorney's job is to do justice. I mean, duh.
It was a few days before they were supposed to execute Anthony Porter. And I went to his cell, and he was sitting on the ground right next to his bunk, and he was crying. He was at the Wailing Wall. And he was trying to tell the coalition people that he didn't do it. And I mean, this was like a few days before he was supposed to be executed. I could not believe a group of law students took the time, the concern, the energy to go and fight for this man's life, and the fact that he actually came off of the roll.
Anthony Porter spent 16 and a half years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. And his case illustrates everything that's wrong with the criminal justice system when it comes to capital punishment.
I was always in a cell. You know, I wasn't in no ordinary cell. I was just like in a vault, like you put money in a vault. You know what I'm saying? They got a little top thing up there.
No windows.
Yeah, like iron doors. I ain't had no bar and iron doors, and they had nothing but like a little chuck hole, and they operate the lights from the outside the wall. And I was in there 23 hours a day.
He had police officers who had the actual killer in their grasp within days and tried to use them as eyewitnesses against Porter. We had prosecutors who were so overzealous that they wanted to win at any cost, even a man's life. We had completely incompetent defense attorneys who could have simply asked the state's key witness whether or not the shooter was left-handed or right-handed, and that would have determined that the shooter couldn't have been Anthony Porter. And we had a poor black defendant, as are most people on death row. We're talking about 9 out of 10 people on death row throughout the United States being indigent, and Anthony Porter got the quality of defense representation that he could afford to pay for, and he almost paid for it with his life.
You know, I couldn't see done stuff like that. They only let me out 1 hour a day to go to the shower, and it's cockroaches and stuff down there, and bugs and water. You know, water be dripping. You understand? Like they just doing like military. Just water just keep dripping like deep, just beating all the time, and the guards come to hit on the door all times of night. You know, I've been beaten. I've been stabbed when I was down there.
I mean, here's a man who came within 50 hours of execution. They had measured him for his burial suit. They had asked him what he wanted for his last meal. They'd asked his family what they wanted to do with his body after he was lethally injected. And all the time, he was professing his innocence, and it was true. He was an innocent man, condemned to die.
As the case was going up to the Supreme Court for certiorari, where you never win, you never get relief there, Porter called his mother and said, "You got to find me a new lawyer." And frankly, if he had been brighter than he was, he never would have done that, because he would have known that it was hopeless. He just knew he wanted a new lawyer. She somehow found Dan Sanders. When Dan looked at the case, he found that Anthony Porter had never been subjected to an IQ test, or to a psychiatric or psychological evaluation. So he quick did that. And they found he had an IQ of 51.
If he had not been granted a hearing on the issue of his mental capacity, he would have been put to death, and we would not have had the time to investigate his claim of innocence. And it took a group of volunteer lawyers, investigators, and a group of my college students in order to free him. Now, what does that say about the system? That the last safeguard for the innocent is a group of 21-year-old undergraduate journalism students. Some people are inspired by that story. Frankly, even though they're my students, I'm outraged by what it says about the system. It raises issues about racism. We had white police officers, a white judge, white prosecutors, all white jurors, and about the only black person in the courtroom besides the family of Anthony Porter was Porter himself.
Unfortunately, Judge Frazier has ruled that I have to represent you. This letter is to inform you of exactly how things are and how they are going to be. At the very beginning, let me make one thing so clear that even you can't misunderstand. This is the only way it is going to be, and I don't give a F if you don't like it. First, I am the attorney in this case, the only attorney. You, on the other hand, are nothing. That was sent to a prison inmate, and there's no name on it, only his ID number. It's from an attorney who was handling a civil case for him. And the last paragraph, he says on here, I will not be manipulated by a parasite like you. I will represent you to the best of my ability solely because of my obligation to myself and to the Constitution, not because I care anything about you. Just remember the most important thing, I don't give an F if you don't like it. And this was signed by an attorney. His signature is here. It's heartbreaking to know that society assumes that they're getting fair trials and the proper representation.
The death penalty has been around since time immemorial. It's always been with humankind. The penitentiary movement actually was a movement against the death penalty. When colonies and states began building penitentiaries to house dangerous criminals, the need for capital punishment lessened. Of course, in the 30s and 40s, you saw the death penalty being used as a substitute for these illegal lynchings. Executions pretty much end in 67 and 68. And then in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court issues an opinion in Furman versus Georgia, in which they declare that the death penalty, as administered in the various states, violates the Eighth Amendment. It's cruel and unusual. It discriminates against poor people and minorities. It's arbitrary and capricious. Who gets the death penalty is called by the Supreme Court as freakish as being struck by lightning. By 1975, we see that 30 states, including Illinois, have written new death penalty laws and have put another 200 people on death row. And then in 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court revisited the issue of the death penalty, and the Supreme Court said these new statutes are constitutional. They fix what was wrong with the death penalty as administered previously. These new statutes will be fair, they'll be accurate, there won't be discrimination. Since reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976 in this country, we've sent 4,000 people to death row. We've executed 800, and we've exonerated at least 100 innocent people. So for every 8 people we've executed, we've found 1 innocent person on death row.
Our statute was changed in 1977, and since that time, we have had 13 defendants who were sentenced to death who were later exonerated. Now, I don't care what your position is on the death penalty. There has to be something wrong when there's that many mistakes made in such a short period of time.
Back in 1977, after the Supreme Court in 76, the United States Supreme Court had reestablished the death penalty, I was a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, and it came to the state as a proposition to be made law, the death penalty. And it was debated on the House floor. And I voted for it because I thought it was the right thing to do. But as the debate went on that day, and we talked about the death penalty, an opponent of the death penalty stood up and said, those of you that are voting for this, how many of you would be willing to throw the switch? And that was a pretty sobering thought, frankly. And I thought about it and thought, you know, an executioner I wouldn't want to be. I now favor a moratorium because I have grave concerns about our state's shameful record of convicting innocent people and putting them on death row. I can't support a system which, in its administration, has proven to be so fraught with error and has come so close to the ultimate nightmare, the state's taking of innocent life.
It was obvious to everyone, except the other members of my court, that there's something wrong with our death penalty scheme, and seriously wrong with our scheme. Now, I'm not defending his position as far as his legal position in any way. However, what he did stopped the killing, and that's the important thing.
It's probably the most serious part of being governor and the obligation that you have, and I'm not sure that anybody should have that kind of power. It gave me a lot of pause for thought and a lot of advice from a lot of people, frankly.
Well, first of all, it was an act of courage by the governor to create the commission, to have the moratorium in the first place, and then to have a group of people look at it. When the governor called me and asked me to be co-chair of the commission, I told him that, you know, I'm opposed to the death penalty. And he said, yes, I know, but there'll be more than enough on the other side. And I never counted precisely where everyone was, but I could see some shifting. As you examine the issue, people just inevitably start moving against capital punishment.
I am not opposed to the death penalty on moral grounds. I'm opposed to it on practical grounds. I think whether or not the state, should kill people who kill people is a value judgment that I think reasonable people can have different views on. I have been in this business for over 45 years, both as a defense lawyer and as a prosecutor. I have seen the process go over the years. I believe it is a tremendous waste of resources and misdirection of resources.
Every study, with one exception, shows that it is less expensive to house someone in prison for life rather than execute the person.
In every case, there are 8 layers of appeal. But when we begin with the capital cases, the capital case is exactly twice as much as a non-capital case involving the same facts, because you've got to not only prove the guilt of the individual, but you've got to go through this mitigation and aggravation trial, which is just as elaborate. And of course we're paying, the public is paying the cost of all of these appeals, and nobody ever forgoes one in a capital case. Not only does it cost all of this money, punish these innocent people, risk the ultimate sanction against an innocent man, but we're leaving the actual perpetrators of these crimes on the street.
We've executed 12 people here in Illinois, and we've estimated that that has come at a cost of about $800 million. So we've spent close to $1 billion in order to have this symbolic death penalty, because what we're really talking about here is how to protect society. And if you took that extra million or $2 million or $3 million per case, and rather than using it to send a tiny percentage of convicted murderers to death row, just 1 or 2%, if instead you took that extra $1 million and used it on things that might actually have an effect on reducing violent crime, improve the schools, provide better prenatal care, hire more police officers.
Now, when we look at problems of society rationally, we usually subject them to a sort of a cost-benefit analysis. But when it comes to the death penalty, there are only costs. There are no benefits. You know, for instance, right here in the city of Chicago, we have rape evidence kits sitting on shelves in the crime laboratory that we don't have the funds to test. We could test these. We could track down guilty rapists and take rapists off the street. The legislature doesn't have the money to do that, and yet we have millions of dollars to devote to attempting to execute people for crimes it turns out they often have not committed.
The police who conducted the investigations in these 13 cases remain on the force. The prosecutors who overstepped the bounds of fairness and the defense lawyers who gave incompetent defense remain in practice. The judges who permitted or caused the errors remain on the bench. The various reasons that are put forth for having a death penalty do not withstand scrutiny. One of them is the issue of deterrence. The commission members agree, and I think the statistics show that the death penalty does not deter murder.
Can I say that not having the death penalty will reduce the rate of murder? No. Will having the death penalty reduce the rate of murder? No. Does a citizen in Illinois feel safer visiting Texas, which has had about 1/3 of the executions in this country, than you do visiting Iowa? Well, obviously you don't.
On the question of retribution, that is the current justification for the death penalty among prosecutors, as I understand it. In other words, these are the most heinous crimes, the most hardened criminals. Society must have a way of dealing with them, take them out, and demonstrate to the law-abiding citizens that society is willing to deal with this problem and to destroy these people. Now, that's their viewpoint, and you can't demonstrate that it's wrong because it's a value judgment. I think it's pathetic.
There's a lot of propaganda about that anytime someone doesn't receive the death penalty, they're going to get out on parole. That's no argument anymore, that they can get out and hurt people. They're not going to get out. They're going to be in prison all of their life. And I think society is fully protected. There are people that admittedly have to be separated from the rest of society, and we've provided for that.
Another thing they talk about is that the victims' families are entitled to some kind of closure. That one doesn't work either. We've talked to a lot of victims' families. Many of them don't agree with that view. There is no closure. If your child is killed brutally, you don't close it because you kill the person that killed them. On Christmas and or Hanukkah or their birthday, you're still going to have heartache, and it will not be relieved by the fact that this person was killed.
Sometimes I feel like a morning dove, hang my head and cry, cry, cry.
As we've gone on, we've learned even more how the death penalty lies to the family members of murder victims. It promises closure. We've learned there's no such thing as closure. That we'll love her and miss her every day, every birthday, every Christmas, every holiday, every time we see someone who looked like her. That pain is still there.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
When we were little, we always used to sing around the piano. My mom was a musical theater person, and so my whole childhood memories of the three girls is growing up and singing, Christmas carols, and we used to sing for the block parties. We'd sing little show tunes, and we'd sing in harmony.
Church.
And I remember after Nancy was killed, just being unable to sit at a piano with my sister and sing.
It was very painful.
That gab was so terrible.
It was.
Because it just felt like there should be three of us and not two.
Yeah.
And it took us years before we could actually sing any song together, much less sing this song. When she was murdered, she saw her husband blown away before her own eyes. So the killer had taken them into the basement, had handcuffed my brother-in-law, and just put a gun to the back of his head and just fired a single shot and literally blew his brains out. And I just think how she had to see that, and how that dream of growing old with him and having children and raising a family just all shattered in that moment. And then to have him turn the gun on her and fire into her belly where she had this baby that was coming must have been so heartbreaking. I think he must have known that would hurt her heart as well as her body.
She begged for her life of her child as she crossed her arms over her belly. She begged for that child, and that's directly where he aimed the gun.
And so in the face of all that, in the face of that horror, and trying to get out, she was banging on a shelf, trying to call for help. She tried to crawl up the stairs and get help, and was too weak from loss of blood. And finally, I think there must have come a moment where she understood that she was going to die and she was going to leave this world behind. And that's when she dragged herself over to her husband and drew in her own blood this heart and this letter U, I love you.
I think about her very last word on life was love, and her very last thoughts, that she left that message. She knew in that moment a message of greater truth and understanding than most people ever find in a lifetime. She knew what life was all about in that moment. She knew.
Hang my head and cry, cry, cry.
I understand now what she was saying, which is that love is the most important thing in the world. And every day that I have life that she does not, I'm obligated to work for that, to help everyone to know that more killing and more hate is only going to make the world a more violent place.
And the press said to us, aren't you disappointed he didn't get the death penalty? And that was the first time that Jennifer and I said, absolutely not. Nancy never would have wanted her memorial to be the death of another human being. There is no point in spilling more blood. It would not bring her back to us. It wouldn't make us feel better. It wouldn't restore our loss. It would only create another grieving family. It would dig another grave. Our forgiveness is for us, because I heard this thing on the radio that I love. Hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'm not going to hate him, because that won't affect him in the least, but it will probably destroy me. He has never asked for forgiveness. He probably wants us to hate him. He probably would like to have that power over us. He shall not.
Politicians involved in every level of the criminal justice system, from the police to the prosecutors, many people who are paid, their careers are built on endorsing and enforcing this system, they are lying and manipulating victims, telling victims you're going to get healing, you're going to get closure at the end of this process, stick with us through this process. I have actually been marginalized and ignored and treated poorly by prosecutors' offices and by elected officials because I'm a murder victim's family member who doesn't support the current system.
Our system has profoundly betrayed the families of murder victims. We promised them a fair and just resolution of the question of who did this heinous crime, who killed their loved one. We promised them fair sentences, including in some cases we promised sentences of death that would be fair and accurate. We betrayed them to go ahead and carry forth executions simply because we don't want to have to tell those people that we betrayed them would be the ultimate betrayal, both of them and of justice.
We're not on the other side of the fence from these victims' family members who are thirsting for death. We're standing with them at the grave with our arms around them, weeping.
The word reconciliation doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a restored relationship. It simply means that we have reconciled ourselves to take what has happened and do the business of life with it rather than the business of death.
And the bullet just went straight through him. Entered his left shoulder, came out by his right pectoral muscle, went right through his heart, tore it to pieces. Andrew died maybe within the next 5 minutes in his brother's arms while a friend drove this car about 70 miles an hour down a crowded commercial street, trying to get to the hospital on time. After Andrew died, a couple days before the funeral, after his death, I had just walked out of a funeral home with my wife where I had selected a casket for my son, something I never thought I would have to do. And I fell to my knees, and I remember screaming and struggling and just flailing away with my fists, saying, let me into the cell with that kid. I'll walk in there and I'll snap his neck right now. And my wife had been involved in a lot of prayer, trying to come to terms with it. She hated him at first too, just like I did. And she wrote a letter to him saying, I know you've been wanting me to say this, but you were afraid to ask, so I'll go first. I forgive you. And the motivations for her forgiveness came from her Christian beliefs in that no matter what somebody does to you, you must turn the other cheek and forgive them.
She finally decided to write Mario a letter. You've probably heard more than once, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I'm writing to tell you it's true. He desires to lead you on a new adventure. It's called life. If he is for you, who can be against you? Well, I don't know whether you'd ever feel up to asking for my forgiveness for killing my son. So I'll go first. I forgive you. So Maureen went to the post office, mailed that letter to Mario Ramos, came home, walked up her stairs, went to her mailbox, and in that mailbox was a letter from Mario Ramos.
And he said, if I could, I would exchange my life for your son's life. It was able, if I were able to, but I know that's not possible, so let me tell you how sorry I am. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I wish I hadn't done this. Please forgive me. Mario described what it was like when he received this letter, and he was saying, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. He felt like he had wings when this happened. Here he is locked in a penitentiary, and yet he feels like he's free because he's been forgiven for his crime. Eventually I got to the place, I was just slower to come around, but I got to the place where I was able to go visit him in prison and write a letter and talk to him face to face. And even though he was very ashamed, he couldn't look me in the eye. I said, look at me. And I had to reach across the table, grab his hands. I said, look at me. Do you know why I'm here? I came here to forgive you. And he became very emotional, and he couldn't speak, and he, was sobbing a little bit, but I didn't hate him. I did not hate him. This is not easy for some people to comprehend. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, but for someone from the public to hear somebody say what I'm about to say would not be easy to understand. Mario killed my son, But if he had been executed, I think a very valuable life would have been wasted.
If I could just read a portion of what Cardinal George wrote on March 11, 2001. The plight of those who have been victims of a criminal's actions demands attention from all, especially the church.
The murder of a family member kills not just the one murdered, but in a different but real way, kills also the family and friends of the one who was murdered. Nothing, not even the death of the murderer, can bring back someone who has been killed. Nor does vengeance on the killer help to heal the hole in a grieving parent's or spouse's heart. The living, especially in the community of faith, must try to be present to these other victims.
I happen to be an opponent of the death penalty, basically because of my own sense of creation and God's own commitment to life. We are so out of step with the rest of at least the Western world, quote unquote, in terms of this nation's commitment to the death penalty. I remember some years ago when apartheid was the law of the land in South Africa, and we would talk about South Africa being that nation that imprisoned more of its people per capita than any other nation. Well, now the United States is that nation, and we talked about the fact that they had the death penalty and killed more people than any other nation through that. Now it's the United States.
I mean, a spirit of vengeance, a spirit of revenge is frightening. It's as frightening as any murder. If that's the kind of society that we live in, we're in deep trouble, because then nobody is safe.
This society crushes and kills its weakest people.
The greatest challenge is to look into the face of another individual and to see in that individual the face of God. Well, if you're facing God, there's certain things you can't do.
If you look at me and you see my face and you see my skin, most people don't see God.
It's not okay for me. It's not okay for my soul, and I don't think it's okay for this society. I don't think fixing it is the issue. Eliminating it is the issue.
I realize that my decision will draw ridicule and scorn and anger from many who oppose this decision. I'm commuting the sentence of all death row inmates, 167 of them.
Sometimes I feel like cry.